Right?
Yes.
Oh yeah,
meetings
well
that was
there should be,
virtual.
there's generally a note that you would sign and I would notarize. We did not have anything today, so I mean, if there's one, if it's one that's been provided by the, by the administrator or the board secretary, I'll be happy to notarize it.
No, I think he just got promoted from alternate to
Okay.
class 4
Oh,
at the
okay.
last meeting. Yeah,
Then I think you're all right. If it's just an elevation, it shouldn't be an issue.
yeah.
You remain under oath, as we would like to say.
Hi, Paul.
Roger doesn't look like Roger.
No, we have Cliff tonight, who will do good by us.
We were laughing. You got Roger just had a
He told me he had knee surgery.
and he's had knee surgery, and I'm on a cane, so you've got the walking wound. Dolan sent a substitute. They wanted to be as close to Roger as possible.
I have 2. Yeah. 2 boys, house full of boys. I didn't know what I would do with boys before I had them, but now they are cool. Yep. That's like anything else. You take what life throws at you and you run with it.
Hi, I'm Dan.
Hello, Dan.
Nice to meet you.
I'm his better half.
Obviously, I'm new.
Yeah. How you doing, Victor? Good. Hi over there.
How are you?
I forgot your name, Counselor.
Oh, I'm Clifford Gibbons.
Cliff, yeah, Cliff.
Nice
How
to
do
see
you
you
do?
again. How fine,
Hi,
thank you.
Paul.
Hello,
See
Counsel.
you in person.
I like
What's
your
your name?
I like your Rotary turtleneck.
How do you do? I'm a member, Fred.
Oh,
I've been
that's
25 years in the Rotary.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
My father was a Rotarian for many years, and I was until fairly recently, I was a member of District 7510.
Oh,
I think
sure,
we're
yeah.
both the same,
Sure. I was 15 years at the afternoon club in Jersey City, and now I'm in New Brunswick.
Also, the mic's too live if you case you
Oh my God, my father was a New Brunswick Rotary for 45 years.
I think we're just short.
When did he leave?
Miss Pat Hadgen?
1962 to, I guess it was the early 2000s. He was with the People's National Bank.
Okay, sure.
No, it's all right.
Well, I was
I
there.
think she is over
I
there.
didn't get there till probably 2010.
Okay, he had left by 2010, but no, I remember he used to drive over.
Mentally looking for
He
some
never,
old members.
he was
had
a
our 100th
real
anniversary
Rotarian.
last year.
Yeah, we threw away
He was
3
a real Rotarian. He never missed a meeting. I, on the other hand, had to make. I got very good at making up.
We have to work for a living.
Hopefully Jill will join us when she comes. I think she's right. Oh, beautiful. Perfect.
What's going on, Patrick?
I haven't seen a full house in
I don't work for a
a
living.
long time.
have retired.
Yes, you got shifted. We're all adjusting to the new
Good
place.
evening, welcome.
Well,
It is congratulations.
your hair looks gorgeous.
Hello. Oh, there you go.
Not good for
Well, I'm rethinking this whole thing.
Okay. Everyone, thank you for coming out. It's officially 7:30 according to my watch and most of the modern world as far as I can tell, so we'll call this meeting to order. It's December 8th, 2022. We're having our meeting of the Highland Park Planning Board for the first time in person in almost 2 years, right? Very exciting.
Yay.
Everyone's come out. It's exciting to see everyone, and we have an exciting topic to cover tonight. But before we get there, I'm going to start with a statement of compliance. This meeting is called to order. Annual notice of this meeting was provided to the Star Ledger, Home News Tribune, and Highland Park Planet on January 29th, 2022. In addition, notice of this meeting via Zoom was faxed to the Home News Tribune and emailed to the Star Ledger and the Highland Park Planet on December 6th, 2022, and was posted on the Borough website at www.hpborough.com and on the bulletin board at Borough Hall, 221 South Fifth Avenue, Highland Park, New Jersey, on December 6, 2022, and has remained continuously posted as required by law. I'm also going to point out, now that we're in person, the location of the fire exits on each side of Borough Hall in the event of an emergency. Forget that now, this time around. That being said, why don't we take roll call, please?
Miss Hand,
Present.
Mr. Brusher,
Here. Mr. Chin,
Here.
Ms. Hadhazi,
Here.
Mr. Hale,
Here.
Mr. Linares,
Here.
Mr. Malay,
Here.
Mr. Perlman,
Here.
Mr. Stern Cardinal,
Here.
Mr. Williams,
Here.
Mr. Thomas,
I'm Clifford Givens, I'm here for Roger. Nice to be here, everybody.
Mr. Cosenza,
Here.
Mr. Koch.
Very good. All right, so we'll turn our attention to our agenda this evening. The only item on the agenda is a little bit of background. As I think everyone here knows, there has been made known that the Stop and Shop grocery chain is no longer going to be occupying the grocery store in the space it currently occupies here in town. It's caused a lot of noise and sentiment around town, and it has led to why we're here tonight. We are here to discuss a Stop and Shop site and adjacent commercial properties for Block 3002, lots 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 30, 34, 35, 36, and 38. Preliminary investigation of a non-condemnation area in need of redevelopment. This public hearing is for our licensed professionals to present to the public the findings of that preliminary investigation that we were directed to undertake by Borough Council earlier this year at one of their September meetings. After we hear the preliminary investigation and the board's had time to make commentary on their thoughts and findings, we'll hear from the public on the public's thoughts about the presentation. From there, if we're ready, we'll make a finding on whether or not these areas, some, all, or none of them, are indeed areas that should be designated non-condemnation areas in need of redevelopment. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to our professional, I'm going to turn it over to our professional, Chris, to give the presentation.
Yes. Good evening. Please raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you're about to give in this proceeding will be the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Please state your name and spell your last name for the record.
Chris Cosenza, Cosenza.
Very good. Welcome. Please proceed.
Thank you. Madam Chairwoman, thank you for the introduction. I think it kind of cuts out some of the intro slides that I was going to go into. So I'm going to go right into really what the agenda of this presentation is about. Really 5 topics. A general overview, which the chairwoman had really dove into already. Talking about an overview of the redevelopment statute, the benefits and how it works relative to what we're doing tonight. A little bit of a context in terms of what's presently there today, as well as some historic background, as well as some environmental analysis of the study area. And of course, really the meat of the public hearing is the evaluation of the study area. And then obviously the conclusion and recommendations from the planning board to the governing body.
Could you, if I may, please make sure you speak into the microphone because I'm having.
Sure.
Okay.
Great. So just on the slide, just for reference, we have a context map just really in showing that the study area is in between South 4th and South 5th Avenue, generally in the center of town, in the middle of the downtown area. So generally speaking, as the chairwoman had indicated, that we've learned that the Stop and Shop store will be closing down over the summer. So for the purposes of tonight, the Borough Council, the mayor and Borough Council believed it was in the best interest really of the whole community that a preliminary investigation of the site occur with respect to the site as well as the remainder of the commercial properties of that 3002 block. For the purposes of, for the next step, this is the first step in the planning process to explore and advance the really any potential for redevelopment plans for the study area, at least underneath the redevelopment designation. As you recall, back in 2016, the entire municipality was declared an area needed rehabilitation. What that means is that we can still do a redevelopment plan for the area. What this presentation does, this public hearing for preliminary investigation, is just really add an additional tool for the redevelopment plan, which is effectively to expand the pilot capabilities from a 5-year up to a 3rd year. That's really the only difference between the rehab designation and the redevelopment designation. So as we discussed, the Stop and Shop store is closing, and I included a quote from the mayor. I'm not going to read it. It's in the plan. It was on the mayor's social media posts, web pages about how important it was for the community to find a solution to the closing of the store, which will obviously include, hopefully, a new user, whether it's in the same building, a new building up front, or some other combination of the two. So as I mentioned, this is really the first step of exploring additional redevelopment tools for the redevelopment plan that were also ongoing. And as the chairwoman indicated, the mayor and borough council authorized the planning board to authorize this particular study. So the scope of the study, as you read through the report, really comes down to a lot of research goes into this. It's not simply a regurgitation of the statutory requirements. Like this lot complies with this provision. You really have to go into the, conduct an inventory of the records of the property, do a site inspection, review police, fire records. There's a whole, it's very detailed, very methodical, because what we can't do is have a net opinion and just say it just qualifies. So that's why I have to go through this effort to really analyze the study area relative to zoning, the master plan, and obviously do the site inspections, exterior of the property, inside, on the roof in cases, and then with all those findings have a summary of what we found and make recommendations to the planning board.
The Supreme Court has mandated that a report has to be prepared with detailed findings that evidence thorough investigation, and that's the Harrison redevelopment case.
Correct. So the purpose of the redevelopment statute, I'll first start with, so 1992, the state legislature enacted the local redevelopment and housing law, which was really largely based on the 1949 Blighted Areas Act, so in 1992, so 30 years ago already, it's really a consolidation of the 1949 laws and really expanded the powers of what can be done for redevelopment, really to guide municipalities through the process of redevelopment and housing in designated areas. So in essence, the local redevelopment housing law is a planning and financial tool, including the ability to transform properties that are really poorly designed or have other issues, and with the principal goal, and this is important, with the principal goal of promoting physical development that's most conducive to the social and economic improvement of the state and its municipalities. So in order to take advantage of the redevelopment statute through a plan, for example, a specified area must first be designated as a rehabilitation area or a redevelopment area. In this case, as I indicated before, we already have a designation of rehab for the entire municipality. The purpose of tonight is to expand that to include redevelopment, at least through non-condemnation. As far as the advantages, like why we do this, so I think you've heard us, Jim and myself, speak about this topic a number of times over the last 5 or 6 years, and really the advantages are numerous. That includes more flexibility in zoning, the ability to do a site-specific concept plan by virtue of a redevelopment plan. Think of a redevelopment plan as like a mini master plan and zoning ordinance for a specific area. You can include very detailed design standards. You have engaged with the redeveloper or property owner in a public-private partnership. So in a sense, we're trying to be proactive in developing a plan for an area as opposed to being reactive with a site plan application. The another advantage is you are able to select a redeveloper and also have financial tools. I actually didn't finish that statement, but there are various financial tools that can be offered as part of the redevelopment statute. So, and redevelopment is not new in Highland Park. These are just two examples of redevelopment really being implemented. River Road, which is now 2 Walter Avenue through to Frederick, 40 units at the corner of Walter and River Road, and then of course the Popoff property, which really expanded the building to more of a better designed building that is more in keeping in scale and character of the adjacent buildings. As far as the procedure, there's a very detailed procedure spelled out by the statute, which we're following, obviously. The first step in order to do a preliminary investigation is for the governing body to adopt by resolution to authorize the planning board to conduct the preliminary investigation. Second step is the planning board, as you can see in red, the planning board's duties are to prepare a map and a statement, in essence, the report that you have in front of you, and it's posted on the borough website. That really outlines the case for how the property does meet the statutory requirements as an area in need of redevelopment. We are currently in step 3, which is, we're in step 4. We previously obviously selected a meeting date tonight and served notice to, we have to serve 2 notices, consecutive weeks, and we are here tonight at step number 4, which is to hear the recommendations from the professional that does the report on behalf of the planning board, and it will be up to the planning board to make a finding of whether or not it agrees or to make its own finding as to whether all or a portion of the study area qualifies as an area in need of redevelopment. And there's additional steps that happens afterwards. It's more mainly internal steps. Once the borough council receives the recommendation from the planning board, they make their own determination, and then once the resolution is adopted, or if it is adopted, they transmit the resolution to the state for filing, and then typically the state will send a letter of consent, basically acknowledging that the area has been designated a redevelopment area. And then you have a whole series of steps relative to the redevelopment plan. I'm not going to get into that because that'll be another meeting. We have actually several redevelopment plans we'll be introducing probably early next year. So I'll go over to that process before. It's generally done by ordinance. It's treated like a land development ordinance. So the statutory criteria. So how does a site become declared area in need of redevelopment? There's various statutory criteria provided by the local housing redevelopment law. It's really largely based on the the so-called blighted areas clause, which was adopted into the New Jersey Constitution in 1947. It was intended to provide guidance to the municipalities on how to facilitate investment into what it viewed as blighted areas. But over time, as you understood in 1992, it was the redevelopment statute was sort of recodified and expanded through the local redevelopment housing law, the current version of the law as of 1992. And as you can see, it's really sort of gone beyond the traditional definition of blight, as you might understand it. For example, it could include just simply abandoned buildings, public or vacant land, obsolete layout. So those things do qualify. If any one site has a condition where it meets any one of these criteria, it triggers that it does confirm and it can be qualified as an area in need of redevelopment. It does not have to be all of them, it doesn't have to be 2 of them, just any one of them. Other conditions include just issues regarding property ownership and title. That's E. F, fire, natural disasters. G, urban enterprise zones. Highland Park doesn't have one. And smart growth consistency. Typically, we do not put our hats on H. We don't say, yeah, this is necessary for smart growth. If we're in an urban area, but we don't normally treat this as a qualifying statutory criteria. If it meets any one of these, then we'll add on H and so on and so forth. That being said, there's also a provision in the law that allows for, that actually designates that properties do not have to meet the traditional definition or statutory criteria as being in need of redevelopment. It's simply just going to be next to it and might be necessary for access, infrastructure, and so on. That's called, what we call that as Section 3 criteria. It's subsection 3 in the statute. So I just want to be clear, when you designate an area in need of redevelopment, it does not necessarily mean all of it's blighted. It could include other features that are just simply obsolete layout, which is commonly used in this report, as well as the Section 3 criteria. So that's a little bit of an overview of the statutory criteria. So now we're going to go through a little bit of an exercise of going through the study area in a little bit more detail. First, trying to talk about, well, what is it that we're talking about? Let's get an understanding what it looks like, what properties are we talking about, and then go through the actual evaluation. Basically, take the previous slide and really apply the findings we did through the investigations, the reports that we found, and so on. So this is simply a location map. North is generally to the up and right of the page. The study areas, actually this is really poorly, I should have used a lighter color, but the proper study area is defined as the area between South 4th and South 5th Avenue, south of Raritan Avenue. It includes all the commercial properties, including the grocery store that's currently used by Stop and Shop. Also includes the Wells Fargo Bank, the Park Town Center, and the Landmark Supply Building, which also has the hair loft. And obviously, all the areas in between include the surface areas. As you can tell, there's not much green space. One interesting thing that I want to talk about is the historic development. And why that's important, I'll get to in a minute. But I just want to show you that as of 1936, it really shows what was consistently done in the past was as Highland Park was developed, essentially as a suburb of New Brunswick. In fact, some maps will call it as East New Brunswick. This is a historic development pattern, particularly along Raritan Avenue, which is here, just for orientation purposes. This is the same 3 streets, South 4th, South 5th, Raritan Avenue. This is South 4th, 5th, Raritan Avenue. It's the same extents. I just want to show that along Raritan Avenue, typically what you see are frame dwellings, 2.5 stories, typically used as residential, but been converted into office and retail uses. You can still see that pattern if you look at buildings today, where you see the 2.5 story frame dwelling with a store in front of it. A very common pattern in Highland Park. It's actually kind of unique. At the Wells Fargo site, previously was a 2.5 story dwelling, another dwelling where the parking lot is, some sheds, masonry shed buildings. This was a used car lot with a small office, 2 homes fronting were the 420, 424. That's the actual address of Stop and Shop. Obviously, you know today the Stop and Shop is here. And then at the corner is what we believe is the same building as the Landmark Supply Building and Hair Loft. So it's that masonry brick building. And there used to be a building, I believe it was, looks like my battery died. I believe in the blue is a sort of a tile building that was used as a laundromat for quite some time. So if you compare this to the prior map, to what's today, think of it this way. And that's why I want to show you. The property has been developed and redeveloped several times over the past 80 years, and certainly before that. So the act of going through redevelopment is not going to be a new topic. It shouldn't be something we should be scared of. It's something we should anticipate. And through the redevelopment plan, it's something we can have control in the process and make sure we get an end result that is beneficial to the community as well as the property owner and redevelopers. One interesting thing that happened as you saw with the 2 dwellings, the 2 dwellings fronting on Raritan Avenue, 420, 424 Raritan. I believe I think my notes say, yes, the dwellings were demolished in the 1940s and 1950s to make way for a 1-story grocery store, which was up against, actually no, that should be fine. It was a grocery store called Food Fair. This is a photo that Terry gave me. I believe it came from the Historic Preservation Committee. So you had a grocery store, 16,000 square feet, up front on Raritan Avenue. It's a beautiful sign, by the way. Really cool. But in the 70s, 1971, that building was torn down for the current building. So we're talking about the Stop and Shop buildings now, pushed all the way to the back of the property with a parking lot in front. The building's already 51 years old. And going back to the main map, as you can tell, it's been redeveloped multiple times. So the frame dwelling was turned into a bank building versus New Brunswick Savings Bank and gone through several iterations, Core States, Constellations, First Union, Wachovia, and then Wells Fargo. Bank was up front, and then it was eventually expanded in 1983, where they took the parking lot that was here and then they developed the rest of the lot that was behind it. And to sort of facilitate that development, a public right-of-way was added by the borough in the 1960s. This used car lot was largely remained that way until like 1940s and 1950s, where eventually a 1-story building with a basement was built on the northeast side of the property, with the parking lot for the remainder of the lots are L-shaped. In the 1960s, it was filled in with the current building, with the current post office all the way down to 418 Burger, which, by the way, is a great place. And the parking lot is in the back, accessible only through that drive-by. I suspect that right-of-way was created to facilitate access to the rear lot, as that was dedicated in 1961. I already talked about the Stop and Shop building. These were demolished in the 40s. Grocery store up front, then the grocery store in the back. This building was eventually demolished in 1989, I believe, to make way for additional parking up front. And this building we think is the same building as you see today, There's a lot of features that are still there today. For example, the high bay space in the front of the building, which was used as a car sales, is still there. It's used as office space. And then in the back of the building, there's along South 5th Avenue, there's a door that comes up, at least an opening for it, that cars are brought into service. And it's still largely there today. In terms of zoning, it's a brief analysis that shows that the entire study area is in a central business district. Simply put, the zoning for this area allows for 5,000 square foot lots, no setbacks except for 20-foot rear yard setbacks. The minimum height is 2 stories. Minimum height is 2 stories. None of these buildings are 2 stories except for a portion of the landmark building, which is the hair loft. So you could say all these buildings are not conforming. Essentially, they're not tall enough by the current code. The maximum height that's permitted in the CBD zone is 4 stories and 50 feet. And of course, the impervious coverage is 90%. A lot of these properties exceed that by virtue of the parking areas, surface parking areas that are on the property. The study area is surrounded by the PO in purple, professional office, and then the RV, which is the 2-family zone. They serve as transition zones, so to speak, to the RA zone, which is south of Magnolia, which is really the south part of town. Relation to the master plan, as you recall, in 2019, we did a pretty extensive update to the master plan and land use plan element, including 4 goals, including to ensure that a vibrant downtown and commercial corridors is respected. We looked at 5 separate corridors, including the downtown area, and one of the areas that was of particular interest was an area that we designated as sort of it's like a picture D, as well, what could we do here? Because we were initially, this is like 3 years ago, we were looking what could we do with that Stop and Shop property. So it's kind of interesting that this kind of full circle 3 years later. Part of that vision was maybe there could be some infill building, whether it's on the Parktown property or it's just on a Stop and Shop site, combination of 2. Just some thoughts. But in essence, one of the goals from the master plan, particularly with respect to the downtown area, was that in order to achieve these goals, one of the strategies that were identified as being important was to utilize redevelopment. As far as relation to the state plan, simply put, Highland Park is right smack dab in the purple metropolitan planning area number 1, where by virtue of smart growth, that's where and the state's goals is that's where growth is targeted, and it should be done in compact forms. There's many other goals. I'm not going to belabor the point, but in essence, going through redevelopment is consistent with the state plan relative to this study area. All right. So that was sort of a really long overview. So now we're going to get into the individual properties. So the study area consists of technically 6 separate properties, even though there's 13 lots that you spelled out, Chairwoman. 1, 2, 3, 6, 8, 30, 34, 35, 36, 37. The Stop and Shop site actually contains a number of those lots. That's sort of haphazard lot lines over the years. So we're going to look at 6 different properties, and we're going to evaluate each one. And then at the end, I'll indicate which criteria that I believe, in my professional opinion, what it qualifies for. We're going to start with the Wells Fargo building, corner lot. And as you can see, give me 1 minute, I'm going to change these batteries.
And we're on page 36 of your study for those following along on the published presentation.
Sorry about that. Oh. So we're starting with the Wells Fargo building. This is block 3002, lot 1. The address is 400 Raritan Avenue. It's a corner lot. The bank building is up front against the corner on both streets. There's a drive-through facility that wraps around the building, ingress only from South 4th, and comes out into Raritan Avenue. Some landscaping along the front of the building, pretty modest in design. What we found was that the drive-through facility really has limited pedestrian facilities. I'm actually going to go back a slide. If you can tell here, the drive-through facility, the drive-through lane is at the back of the building, but there's really no way for people who park to use the bank to get to the bank building unless you walk all the way to the public sidewalk in the middle of a drive aisle, which is unsafe, to get to the side of the building, which is actually nicely manicured lawn into the building. So it's a little bit of a haphazard pattern. Actually, when I was walking the site several times, I would see a lot of people just simply walking through the drive-through lane back and forth between these areas, which is obviously unsafe. The apron itself is in disrepair on the other side of the building. I don't have a photo for it, but it's obviously in the report. The egress route is actually quite wide for what's supposed to be just a single lane exit, typically only 10 to 12 feet. This measures well over that. In fact, they have striping in hopes to keep the cars just centered. But that's quite a lot of pavement, which encourages vehicles to come out fast, and you're already on top of the sidewalk and may impact the pedestrians. In the drive-through lane itself, there's no bollards that would protect the vehicles from hitting the building, and there's really limited features that protect pedestrians from the drive-through lane. As far as the exterior of the building itself, it's just some minor staining and some water damage, nothing critical that we saw. As far as the remainder of the site, it's sort of not well landscaped other than the lawn area by the back of the building. This asphalt to sort of spill it over and into the loose stone, and obviously loose stone is not a great landscape material because it tends to migrate onto the travel pathway and also presents a tripping hazard. Various sidewalks are in disrepair, although I did note that I did have comments before about the gutter of the street. The street was actually just recently repaved, so I took it out of the report. The curb and the sidewalk still in pretty fair condition. Let me go back. As far as the interior building, there's no pictures because the bank asked me not to take photos. But what I did find was that the bank building has a lot of wasted space. Unused offices, essential workspace is really large. In essence, when the bank was expanded in the 1980s, it really made way for an obsolete layout in terms of today's design for banking, especially since a lot of it's done digitally. It has a full basement, which none of it's really being used. It's a large break room space, almost as large as this room. Just a couple tables. No one really uses it. There's no elevator in the building, so staff members who have a mobile disability can't get to the break room and whatnot. And the basement's largely empty. So obviously, obsolete layout and design, or faulty arrangement design, is just not designed to today's standards for banks. It could be made much smaller. There's a really inefficient use of land. So with all that said, with regards to the faulty arrangement design of the parking area and the interior of the building, despite it being pretty good condition, I find that the property qualifies as under statutory criteria D.
Say that again?
I find that that particular property, Lot 1, qualifies for statutory criteria D, as in dog. Move on to lot number 2. This is known as the Park Town Center property, so the 406 to 418 Meriden Avenue. 406 is the Highland Park Post Office, and 418, as you go along the end, is the 418 burger. I had a Firehouse burger this afternoon. Good. So collectively, this building has 10,400 square feet. It's a modest-sized building, only 1 story in height. As we discussed in a historical review, the building was originally built with 4 leaseholds on the corner, and then that portion has a basement, and the remainder of the building, which has the post office and 2 other businesses, was built on a slab. At the back of the building, you can see there's some issues with water damage and water infiltration. With respect to the ground surface, I actually don't have a photo of it, but standing in this view, looking behind you, there's a curb, a depressed curb for vehicles to go from the public right-of-way into the rear parking lot. That's been paved over with asphalt in an attempt to prevent some stormwater sheet flow to getting into the property. But at this point, a lot of damage has been done through the stormwater over the years, including some recent storms. There's a sump pit that pulls in water and puts it out toward neighboring property. You have various sandbags and various debris and obviously rusting infrastructure. There's some water damage in those spaces of the building that have a basement, including rotting subfloors. The post office on this side has several broken windows, and there's a few broken windows at the back of the building. And there's really a lot of limited storage space for these tenants through no fault of their own or the property owner. But the solution in many cases is just stick it in the back. And that sort of creates a sort of haphazard parking area problem. And there's also no designated trash area. Typically in a building of this size, with this many tenants, you would think that there would be a dumpster. But this predated most zoning ordinances, so the solution is just a series of cans which sit perched on top of a hill. Any windy day, they're all going to fall over. And as far as the building itself, I believe the building was renovated in 1997, actually quite nicely done with the stucco finish. And I think at the time, the borough had worked with the state and the property owner to kind of improve the streetscape, which includes adding more trees and benches. So it's actually quite nicely designed at the front of the building, but it's obviously showing its age for a building that's now 60 years old, renovated about 30 years ago. The water stains and patterns underneath the awnings, which of themselves are showing deterioration, dilapidation. Underneath the awnings is various exposed light fixtures and equipment that's showing rust and whatnot. And there's some areas underneath the fascia of the overhang that's really peeling away, and so water damage is getting into the building. Let's see. So I kind of went over the basics of that property. What's different about this property than the others is that there's seven different leaseholds, so they all vary in condition, especially with the interior of the building, depending on how recently they were renovated for a recent change of occupancy. So the building varies in condition, but generally speaking, especially due to the water damage to the post office and the conditions inside the building, especially the post office and a couple other leaseholds, I find that the property is substandard, unsafe, and has obsolescent characteristics, so it qualifies as under criteria A as an apple. And due to the dilapidated conditions, faulty arrangement design of the parking area, I find that it qualifies under criteria D. Next property is the big one, Stop and Shop building itself. On the right side of the screen, I just want to illustrate that there's a few different topics I want to review. So strap yourselves in. So first I'm going to start with the frontage conditions, so mainly the streetscape along South 5th, as well as along Raritan Avenue itself. So along the South 5th property line, you can see that various sidewalk slabs are showing overgrowth, cracking, dilapidation, overgrowth. These wheel stops in the parking area are sort of dislodged and moved away. Vehicles have hit the fence in disrepair, and there's debris and whatnot pretty much all over the place. More critically, though, is along Raritan Avenue. So you've seen these two photos at the top. You can see that there essentially is no buffer. It's just wheel stops. And those wheel stops are the only separation protection from a large vehicle and a pedestrian. Simply unsafe. Also not in keeping with the design standards with the borough, which is have a landscape buffer if there's any parking area. And for that matter, the parking area itself is not conforming to the ordinance. You're not supposed to have a parking area between the building and the street. And when the property was renovated in the 90s in cooperation with the borough, I think it was at the time when the supermarket was being transferred from Food Town to Edwards, was a time when the parking lot was renovated. So that was the last time it was done, which was about 20 plus years ago. This was the end result. It's obviously still, with today's standards, a high quality design and site planning and our own values of how we design streetscapes. This is critically and just simply put, a faulty arrangement design, very unsafe. The wheel stops in some cases aren't even affixed to the ground anymore, they're shifted. So vehicles could go into the sidewalk. Along the walkway between Raritan Avenue to the front of this grocery store, various slabs are deteriorating, and the wooden fence behind the view of this photo and the metal railing fence are starting to spew out and break apart. That same walkway, when you lead yourself to the front of the store, sort of a dead end there. There's no accessible features, but as you would traditionally find with a warning tactile pad, like the red rectangle with the dots. That's a warning strip for anyone in a wheelchair to know that they need to stop and be able to turn. This obviously is not code compliant because first of all, it doesn't have the warning strip and it has a large dip here. More importantly though, the design itself is faulty in the sense that it forces users to turn left and then turn right. It just creates this large, what I call no man's land. There's no protection from the vehicles, and it sort of puts the users right in the middle of the parking lot without very much protection. I did some research for the police department, and we found that since January 2019, there were 14 accidents in this parking lot. 3 involving pedestrians, including 1 who passed away. So, in terms of the ADA spaces, they may be compliant themselves. However, in order for a user to use the space, the access aisle in between, they have to get out of the vehicle onto the access as you typically would. But where do they go from there? They have to go out into the middle of the drive aisle, back in, and then into the apparent unsafe routing system. Same thing applies to the parking spaces in between the grocery store and Parktown Center fence. The ADA spaces are situated here. They're properly dimensioned and signed. However, since there's no sidewalk here along the fence line, it forces users to go into the street, back onto the sidewalk, and into the street again. So sort of a haphazard pattern. The condition of the parking area itself has been paved in quite some time. Various painting and repainting, restriping is causing some confusion, and it's not very legible. Various areas are not well utilized. This areas that could be used for more parking, or simply used for storage. Landscape islands by today's standards are kind of small and useless because the landscape island, especially with lower level landscaping, provides refuge for users to walk from the car through the drive aisle to the building. That landscape island, if it's properly sized at say 8 to 10 feet wide, provides some better visibility between other vehicles traveling and seeing other vehicles, because when the vehicles are parked here, it's essentially blocking the sight triangle of all these parking spaces. Without a properly designed parking aisle, as you can see in various places, this sort of limits visibility throughout the parking lot. And in terms of the loading area, it's essentially used as a sort of ad hoc storage area with debris and unused carts. The stairway leading up to the dock itself has no railing. It's not the code. The retaining wall has a severe crack and needs to be evaluated by a structural engineer. The bumper block at the loading dock has been depressed and not to today's standards. Essentially means this is so narrow now that for those vehicles that have a metal grate at the bottom, they'll just constantly hit the building, just making these situations worse. And as you can tell, there's a lot of rust and some mold conditions in the loading area. Throughout the exterior of the building, there's various water infiltration and damage and staining. The retaining wall next to the parking area, the Wells Fargo, is just simply falling over. The expansion joint is starting to fail, and then this various street furniture is just unusable because it's broken. And the access way in front of the store in many areas is blocked. So even if you weren't in a wheelchair, there's many cases you're forced to walk back into the street and into the front of the store. Scott accompanied me on the inspection. We took a look at the roof, and we found various areas that had flashing was failing. So in addition to water pooling into various low spots as well as blocking of the vents, we're seeing various HVAC piping and protection measures that basically the flashing is failing, which means more water is getting into the building, which may cause mold. As far as the interior of the building, these are mainly pictures of the back of house stuff. So imagine yourself in the warehouse. So in 1971, when the warehouse was first built, a nice empty box, kind of clean, and it's straightforward, you have a bunch of space. But over time, the needs of the store change. So they're starting to add more coolers, maybe a cooler just for eggs, a cooler just for milk, a cooler just for fruits and vegetables. So additional coolers are added. They're quite large, So it's an inefficient use of space. Part of the warehouse had to be carved out and be utilized for, so I call it high-risk lockup. So high-value equipment is stored and locked up, which obviously is not a big deal, but it takes away from the storage space from the rest of the store. The manager's office is kind of cramped, has no windows, and is another add-on to the warehouse. Basically, over time, the actual usability of the warehouse kind of shrinks and it's unusable, and it's not a great working environment. And I say that from experience. I used to work in a warehouse for 15 years, and the elbow room, you need elbow room. You need to move the pallet jacks around, and you're just simply constantly hitting corners and buildings. Various coolers have standing water because it's not pitched correctly to the floor drains. There's stains and rust and damage all throughout various coolers. And on the sales floor, there's various areas where it simply hasn't been renovated, clearly hasn't been updated in quite some time, including the fixtures themselves. So with all those features, I know I went through a lot and really getting nitpicky and kind of pounding how bad potentially the Stop and Shop building is. For those reasons, I find that the building qualifies under statutory A for substandard working conditions, as well as criteria D for faulty arrangement and design. Two more buildings, two more properties, and then we're done. This is what we call the Landmark Supply Building. It's Lot 7. Property address is 438, 440 Raritan Avenue. It's a corner of South 4th and Raritan Avenue. Two-story building at the very front. Otherwise, the remainder of the building is one-story metal frame. Generally speaking, not many problems. It's very well maintained. So these are just really nitpicky pictures, photographs of a little bit of damage of the foundation, minor cracking, which needs to be patched, staining from the cornice line and parapet wall, and a little bit of a minor crack in the window. Generally speaking, I found no issues with this building. Very well maintained, despite it being the oldest building in the study area. So I give kudos to the property owner and the business owners for maintaining this. And I believe a former planning board member or council member actually ran a business in this building. So it's an interesting history of all the different types of businesses that were there on the first floor. The second floor is a service business. There's no elevator to get to the second floor. You might qualify it as a faulty arrangement design, but this obviously predated building codes. But generally speaking, I find this building actually does not qualify as an area need redevelopment. However, due to Section 3 criteria, you can still designate certain properties as those who are not qualify as an area need for the effectiveness of really effectuating a redevelopment plan. Whether you might need to square off a building or parking lot for future redevelopment or what have you, or you need it for access. So for that reason, because of its proximity to the Stop and Shop property, I find that this property qualifies under Section 3 of the redevelopment statute. These are the last two properties. Actually, technically, two separate properties. They are on them own. They are owned by the Wells Fargo Bank. They're about 25 feet wide each, so they're not conforming to today's standards. But taken together, they serve as a parking area for the Wells Fargo Bank. So technically, it's off-site, because you have to cross a public right-of-way to get to the parking area. There's some issues with this parking area relative to its layout. There's two-way driveways serving the entire parking lot, but there's only 2 rows of parking. Extremely inefficient. Typically, you only need the 24-foot lane with head-in parking on both sides. So technically, that 22 feet of pavement is a complete waste of space. Even though that is the area of the public right-of-way, it should be paved for access. But the overall design is completely inefficient, so that leads to additional unnecessary impervious surface, as well as it contributes to the urban heat island effect. And the fact that there's very limited landscaping, in fact, a lot of it has been removed but not replaced, that contributes again to the faulty arrangement design. There's really effectively no buffer between a parking area and a residence next door. And then as we discussed, I think previously, the users who are parking here, the only way they can get to the bank is they must cross multiple drive aisles, and including the drive-through lane, to get to the front of the store. Pretty unsafe. You're risking your safety by having to cross all these parking areas. And in the case of the ADA space here, again, once a user comes out and uses the access aisle, they're forced to walk into or use their wheelchair to go into the drive aisle completely unsafe. There's no logical or proper routing system to get people from the parking areas to the parking lot. Obviously, once you get to the sidewalk, it's safer. And as for the sidewalk and the apron itself, showing some signs of dilapidation, deterioration. And for those reasons, I find that the property qualifies under Section D, Criteria D, as an area in need of redevelopment due to its dilapidated conditions and faulty arrangement of design. This is the summary of all of the criteria that we hit. Essentially, all the properties meet something other than the landmark building, which does not meet any criteria, but does qualify under Section 3. So in essence, I found through this report that the entire study area, lots 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 30, 34, 35, 36, 37, all qualify as an area in need of redevelopment. So it's now in your hands to make the recommendation back to council whether you agree. You can make the determination whether it's all of the areas that are discussed in this report or just a part of it. So it's, at this point, it's in your hands. If you have any questions, just let me know.
Thank you, Chris. All right. So at this time, I'm going to ask members of the board if they have comments or questions, observations to go over with Chris or just in general. Kalitra?
So, 406, excuse me, 406 Raritan Avenue, where the present U.S. Post Office is. If that area is in need of redevelopment, are there federal funds that can be supplied or allotted to redevelop the post office? How does that work?
Sorry, which kind of funds were you referring to? Anything in particular or funds in general?
Just funds in general, or like federal funding that goes into, because it's
in
the...
terms of federal funding, I'm not privy to that. I wasn't prepared to answer that question. But generally speaking, underneath the rehab designation and as well as obviously for redevelopment designation, the borough could, through a redevelopment plan, offer rehab programs that offer financial assistance. So it's certainly an option, but obviously it can't be done until there's a redevelopment plan. So all those things are on the table.
Yeah, I'm just curious as to where that fits in, given that it's the post office.
That I don't have an answer to. I'm sorry.
Anyone else?
Yeah, I have a couple of questions. Thanks, Chris. So, you talk about the vehicular crashes and which lots they were on, where they occurred, the lots.
The vehicle crashes?
Yes.
Generally speaking, all the accidents occurred on the Stop and Shop property.
Yeah. Okay. It wasn't
This is the wrong lot number.
specific to any particular lot within the collection of properties that are owned by the property owner who leases
Right.
to the Stop and Shop.
Okay, so to answer your question, so the police records go by property address. It doesn't make a distinction between which specific lot it's on, therefore not really a general area. I did notice that a lot of the accidents did occur generally in this area here, which is where all the driveways converge on each other, including the fatal incident.
Were there any crashes on any of the other properties?
I did not do a deep dive into that report. There may well have been. This caught my attention and really built the case for the criteria. Other properties simply don't have parking lots. I didn't see any accidents on the parking lot behind Wells Fargo Bank, and I'm not aware of any accidents I saw associated with the Parktown Center. Almost all the accidents were relative to the this particular area. And that's just from 2019. There could be many more
Understood.
before that.
In your investigations, did you review any construction code records, fire records? Are there any building code violations, any fire code violations, any health department violations?
We did find, in certain cases, a couple of zoning violations. For example, the Wells Fargo Bank was supposed to have a dumpster, and this is going back about 15, 20 years ago, and it's still not there, so it could very well still be in violation of the zoning ordinance. There's a couple not that many, but a couple building violations from the 70s and 80s relative to timing of permits. Not many that I found. Most records I found were just simply getting permits for various improvements to the properties. One thing I did note, and I did put it in the report, was in the Park Town Center, certain tenants appear to not have gotten, certain leaseholds appear to not have gotten many permits for improvements that would show that they've been periodically updated. So typically HVAC equipment's updated 10 or 15 years. And in some cases there's just a gap in construction history. Doesn't mean that it wasn't done, just could mean that it was done without permits, which is not unusual. I did see there were gaps in the building records. As far as fire records, I did not see many other than burglar alarms, a couple associated with the Park Town Center. There were numerous police records where people parking in an ADA stall without code, without permission, without a placard. I did not put that in the report, but it was extensive research done. In terms of health code violations, I did not see any, but I did see that the water line was broken, and I think it was replaced recently. But I did not put that in the report.
And in terms of, I guess, the fire, did you see any of those, I guess, security alarms, any reported burglaries, assaults, anything?
I did not look for assaults. So I did not think it was relative to a design issue. I did see burglar alarms being tripped at the Parktown Center for certain leaseholds.
And it's, just want to focus on the Parktown Center for a moment. All of the retail spaces are tenanted, yes?
I believe there's one vacancy at 414.
Currently, now there's a vacancy?
Yeah,
One vacancy.
there's one.
I believe the property owner's here. Do you have one vacancy?
It's not vacant.
Okay.
It's vacant from the standpoint, there's no retail business going on at present,
Okay.
but it's not vacant.
And could you tell me about the duration of the tenants that are renting there? I mean, how long has the post office been there? How long has 418 been there? Like the general, like there are a couple of there's a new retail, relatively new retail establishment in the last few years. Yes, the next to 418.
Wait,
yes.
I'm sorry, I'm
Yes.
just gonna step
I'm
in.
not-
It's not that I don't want to hear from the property owner, but there's a method and we need to be careful about not taking testimony that's not sworn to.
Chris.
Sorry.
Correct.
I did do the research, but I did not analyze it. There's been some businesses have been turned over. There's been a few that have been through a few years. Post office, I think, has been there for quite some time. But I don't have an analysis handy. It's in my backpack. I'm sure I can go through and give you some additional information. But I don't have it handy.
And the reason why I ask some of these questions is, and I'm not asking to be sworn in as a licensed planner or anything, but I've done redevelopment preliminary investigations over the years. I'm a little concerned over the use of criteria A for at least for the town center property. In your report, it does say the property is in fair condition. It is mostly or not completely tenanted. There was not in your preliminary investigation, any documented building code or fire code or health code violations. There is no reports of burglaries or assaults or anything that determine that criteria A that property meets criteria A of the redevelopment statutory criteria. It appears to be it's not the finest building anyone has seen, but that's not relevant to the statutory criteria. It is building. It has fairly new tenants. It has long-standing tenants. It also services a portion of the population that maybe not the most highest income, has a laundromat and a dollar store, and those retail uses are important. And I don't see how you got to criteria A for that property. I don't. So that's one comment. I'm going to move on to property 7, which is the landmark.
Sorry, before you move on, I just want to reiterate for criteria A, mainly the conditions that I observed were in the basements. I believe there's 4 leaseholds that have a basement. The other 3, including post office, don't because it was built at a different time. And many of those basements that had substandard walkways and stairways down to the basement with no railings. Railings are falling over. The So water damage and some subfloor being rotted. So those really sub-conditions that lead into standard working conditions is really what I base that standard on. And if the board does find that it does not meet criteria A, you can certainly disregard it and remove it, but it still does qualify underneath criteria D.
Well, that would go to my other thing about criteria D for that property, being that it's obsolete layout and design that is detrimental to safety, health, morals, and welfare of the community. Again, I asked you for whether or not there was any reported burglaries or health code violations that would result or lead to some public health threat of the continuation of that building, and none was in your preliminary investigation report, or none provided here tonight. So I have an issue with actually this property being included in any criteria in this preliminary investigation. I just say that here. And I don't know if you want to respond to that.
What about the layouts for the back of the building?
Again, if suboptimal layout may not lead to it has to be detrimental to safety, healthy, morals, and welfare.
Right,
that would be documented through violations, health code violations, and the like, which would be in a record.
Well, I would think there can be more violations than just those recorded, such as the lack of dumpsters for safe disposal of the trash generated by the businesses, the lack of safe access to the back of the businesses. Those, to me, are substandard design layouts. And while the building is not falling down, it's also not in optimal condition, at least from the photos and from my personal observations going there. The front of the building is not the worst thing I've ever seen. You get up close, you can see where the deterioration is coming in. But the back of those buildings, there is a lot of water damage, and when you walk that public pedestrian walkway, to me, I see the deterioration of those buildings. And I think we've seen some photos of it, so I hear you on the lack of fire code violations, lack of burglaries, but I do think those are not the only ways to document the ongoing deterioration of the building. Again, I'm not saying it's falling down, but we can see, at least I think I can see from some of these photos, that their building does need some maintenance attention from the water deterioration. And I do think the back layout of those buildings is not well done for today's standards for what's needed to maintain a building with lots of pedestrian traffic, lots of ongoing businesses, lots of progress. And if there's ways to help that process, I think that's a good thing.
Yeah, and to that point, not all issues are ever documented. In this case, this offers an opportunity of the documentation of the condition at this point, which is why we spend an enormous amount of time taking photos and incorporating the report. That's why the report is not just a wall of text. Believe me, we're showing it to you through evidence. In terms of the parking lot layout, yes, Chairwoman, you are correct. The faulty arrangement design is really related to the parking lot itself. It has no defined drive aisles. The parking spaces are haphazardly laid out. The wheel stops are not properly aligned or affixed to the ground. There's no buffer around the property. There's no designated trash removal area, recycling. All the trash cans, as you saw, are at the top of the hill, and several of them, you can see the trash is sort of laid out along the side. By today's standards, certainly a faulty arrangement design in terms of the parking lot layout. And it's not safe because there's no defined routing system for all the vehicles to park, as well as for any pedestrians and especially workers or staff members who use the back of the building.
I just want to note that it is not necessarily the absence or presence of objective violations or findings is not necessarily it's objective. It's objective evidence, but the opinion and investigation of a qualified engineer or planner, based upon proper planning standards, can also be used as evidence in terms of reaching the conclusions under the LRHL. So I just want to caution the board, just because there may not have been X number of violations or identified problems, that doesn't necessarily mean that the quantum of evidence isn't met. That's because the whole point of the proceeding is to have a detailed investigation and findings based upon the qualified expertise of the professional. not just a net opinion, not just a sweep over, but things that can be identified and discerned over and above any public record or violations or other identified conditions.
I'll let others speak. Yeah, I'm done for now. So.
Oh, if anyone wanted to talk
Yeah.
about this building before we move on to
Yeah,
maybe another
sorry.
lot, maybe that's, Patrick?
I just had a question that I think gets to maybe the underlying point. Since this is a non-condemnation, I think it would be, let's say, advantageous to you to go on. Like, what role would then the property owners have in the ongoing redevelopment, assuming it moves forward? They would have options whether to, they have input or either to go along or not go along. I mean, just elaborate on that aspect.
So regardless of what the findings are made tonight, the entire study area, including the entire municipality, is already an area need rehabilitation. What this means is that the property owner and other property owners could engage the borough, or vice versa. The borough could engage different property owners, say, we'd be interested in doing a redevelopment plan that might benefit all the parties, including the community. Relative to the redevelopment designation, specifically non-condemnation, technically there's really no difference between non-condemnation and condemnation in terms of the statutory findings, other than the fact that if you do condemnation, it just gives you the power to utilize eminent domain. In a non-condemnation, you can't do that. Relative to the difference between area needed redevelopment versus area needed rehabilitation, really the only difference is the up to 5 year pilot versus a 30-year pilot. That's the only difference, really. If for whatever reason, the planning board, the governing body said, nope, this is not area need redevelopment, we can still do a redevelopment plan, which is the vision of the mayor, to have a grocery store put in and possibly some sort of mixed use aspect. We're jumping ahead a little bit. In essence, we did this report to have that additional tool that might be useful to help spur redevelopment of any one of these properties. Specific to the property owner, he or she does not have to engage the borough. And obviously there's no condemnation involved. We're not interested in doing that. We've declared that up front. We are not using it. We're supposed to do that as of 2013. So that opportunity is always on the table.
I think that's important to emphasize, that this designation does not force the property owners to do redevelopment.
Correct.
This is a town-side designation, so the town could, if they wanted to, make a plan, but they can't force action.
Yeah, I think from my experience working with the borough officials, we've been trying to be proactive and transparent and say, we were interested and we'd love to work with you. So that way it's less red tape, we'll get it done, everyone's happy. More importantly, it benefits community and removes, in certain cases, some eyesore conditions and some functional issues. That's the whole goal of being able to do a redevelopment plan. And hopefully with the redevelopment designation, we have that additional tool, which ironically the borough does not have to even use. We just want that in a toolbox, just in case it becomes useful for a particular project that either we are coming up with or it's brought to us and we work with the property owner or redeveloper in a public-private partnership.
Any other comments about the Parktown building?
I have a question. You mentioned earlier not getting ahead of ourselves, but I think it's important to think about what could happen. I think Mr. Pullman had some concern about the commercial tenants in the building. Can you give maybe not speculation, but sort of a general description of what could happen or what the role of a commercial tenant would be moving forward if we were to declare this an area in need of redevelopment?
Yes, we're sort of jumping ahead a little bit, and it's not really privy to the investigation. But to answer your question, I believe the statute has a requirement where it's sort of a business or workplace relocation program similar to affordable housing. I'll do more research and get back to you on that, but generally speaking, there should be accommodations to relocate.
Thank you.
That's if the borough wants to engage into a program that forces the businesses to relocate. I think generally speaking, we don't want to do that. I mean, you've heard the issues on the other downtown plans. Councilman Hale.
I would just add to that the governing body is very interested in partnerships
Yes.
with landowners and partnerships with developers, not in confrontational or adversarial relationships. And part of the reason the governing body put this forward is so that it is an attempt to have all of the tools that we possibly can to have a partnership relationship, a non-adversarial relationship, to move forward. And I think that's what the landowners want. I think that's property owners want, and I think that's what the borough wants. So that's the primary goal, is not to be in an adversarial position, but to be in a partnership position.
I agree.
Thank you.
Jeff, did you want to talk about the landmark building?
Yeah, I'd like to ask a couple questions about the landmark building. Your testimony said that the property does not meet, the statutory criteria, but you're using Section 3 because you need the frontage. The frontage, the building's is 50. The lot and the building is 50 by 100.
Yes.
The linear frontage along the southern part of Raritan Avenue is over 500 feet. Less than 10% of the linear frontage is occupied by that building. I have trouble believing that you need that additional 50. That 50 feet is necessary enough to use Section 3 to include that in your into a need of redevelopment. It's 50. It's a 5,000 square foot lot over the entire site is 3.6 acres. I mean, you're looking at a very small site across a very large study area, and it's at a corner. It doesn't divide up the linear frontage at all. I really have tough time understanding how redevelopment of the site would be frustrated by the retention of that building.
So what benefit or detriment would there be in including that building under subsection 3? Is that where we're going with it? I don't mean to.
I'm asking the planner to justify the inclusion of Section 3. That's all.
So generally speaking, Section 3 is defined as, actually the definition of area needed redevelopment under the statute is the very definition of redevelopment area or area needed redevelopment as referred to in the report continues by specifically stating that a redevelopment area, and this is in quotes now, a redevelopment area may include lands, buildings, or improvements which of themselves are not detrimental to the public health, safety, or welfare, but the inclusion of which is found necessary with or without change in their condition for the effective redevelopment of which they are part. That's what's commonly referred to as Section 3. Elsewhere, through the Redevelopment Handbook, a Guide for Rebuilding New Jersey's Communities, 2nd edition, this section also says that the inclusion of properties that do not meet the statutory criteria but are essential to be included for the designation to effectively redevelop the area. Examples include property located within and surrounded by otherwise blighted areas, properties that are needed to improve access to be developed, and properties that are needed for infrastructure utilities, or properties that otherwise could be determined to be critical to the area's successful redevelopment. So I think that the last phrase is could be determined to be critical to the area's successful redevelopment. In order to really do that, you have to have, in a sense, a vision of what the redevelopment is. Again, we're not there yet. But it could be critical to have that corner building as part of a complete redevelopment plan. That doesn't mean that building has to go away to serve a redevelopment plan purpose. It could be retained in a new building simply next to it. Or it's knocked down and part of a new building. We don't know yet. We're not at that point yet. But due to its proximity to the what we're effectively calling a blighted area, and the fact that it could be necessary for successful redevelopment. Obviously, corner buildings are important in the streetscape. I find that this would be, I think it qualifies as traditionally used as for Section 3. And I think we've used it a number of times in this community under other plans. So not unusual. Again, it's odd saying it doesn't meet the criteria, but it may be useful. It could be beneficial for a future redevelopment. So you're kind of projecting forward. We don't know what that might be, but this corner could be important as part of our overall development. Which means it could just stay where it is. We could have a redevelopment plan that that building shall be maintained as a historic building. Or it shall be incorporated into a 3- or 4-story building. We don't know yet. We're not sure. We're still in the very early stages of a redevelopment plan.
So is it your testimony that the inclusion of the landmark building lot would be necessary for effective redevelopment of the area?
Yes, of the area.
Any other members of the board have questions or comments for Chris? Okay. With that, then,
One correction, which I can do later.
Oh.
You mentioned North 4th, and it should be North 3rd, North...
Could you
South
speak
3rd,
into the
South
microphone? I
4th.
can't hear you. Thanks.
Page 61, thank you.
So in that case, I would probably capture that as part of either a resolution by the planning board to council or a memo from either the board clerk or the attorney to clarify that correction for the benefit of the borough council. So could you just clarify again what that correction should be?
where's the correction again? What page?
This is page 61, I think you said?
Page 61,
Yeah, my papers are in this.
actually, no, it's page 46.
Okay, thank you.
And what is the error?
It says North 4th.
It should be South 4th. That's all.
Okay, all right,
South. Southward, yes.
thank you.
This is why Alan's our secretary.
I actually, I'm trying to channel my best Alan Williams, and I just have a question that's similar. On page 21, the owner of 400 Raritan and is listed as Wachovia.
Yes, that
Is that still? I just because that's the
tax
old
records
bank,
say.
so I just want to make sure it's still Wachovia. Okay, thank you.
I did a double take when I did that too, and I found it 2 other times, but that's what the tax records say.
There you go.
It was Wachovia in the long, long ago.
Actually, I have a question.
Yes.
In your research, did you learn anything about the plans that the landlord for the Stop and Shop building may have after Stop and Shop vacates the space?
Not during this particular research, but in the resolution that authorized the planning board to do the study, there was another resolution authorizing the planner to do the study as well as to start a redevelopment plan. We are engaging with the borough council and property owner representative on concepts, but nothing I think that's public record yet. Again, still very early.
Okay, so in the sort of preliminary conversations, is there any talk of demolishing the building or leaving the building standing, or
So
in
I
terms of the
personally have not been
concepts?
involved in this conversation. So
I would
busy.
just say that we're very, very early in those conversations. We've had conversations about this process, conversations about potential other tenants, but in terms of planning about what would happen, we're not there yet. I mean, we've had those we've had initial and wonderful conversations, but in terms of demolishing a building or putting it up or anything like that, first steps first. This is one of the first steps.
So just so as Stop and Shop vacates the space, the landlord has not leased the space or is offering the space for lease to another potential tenant?
I can't speak for the landlords, so I think that there is a number of different tracks that could follow for this. One is to attempt to fill the space with a current tenant. Another is an attempt to have a redevelopment. There could be combinations in between. We were just way too early in the process to know which of those roads we're going to go down. We're trying to get all of the tracks, all of the process is pointed in the direction of what is the way to get a great grocery store there as well as other things. So, we're way too early in that process.
Yeah, as far as that research, it's obviously a small site.
Yeah.
So it's a unique, different research. We're not just looking for a Whole Foods that's 50,000 square feet.
Right.
It simply won't fit. So falls a lot of work on the borough's part, facilitating public-private partnership effort. That's why this is important, to engage in a non-adversarial role. Really, we're helping property owner as well as helping ourselves to retain a grocery store. We do not want a food desert.
Okay. With that, and in the spirit of being non-adversarial with the public, I'd like to open up the meeting to public comment on this preliminary investigation and presentation we just heard. So if there's any members of the public who wish to be heard, please come up. Use Chris's microphone? Is that what we're going to use? No, oh, we have a microphone over in the corner. Any members of the public wish to be heard? No? Well, okay.
Well, I do have one comment.
Oh, then please feel free to come up to the microphone, state your name and address for the record, please.
My name is Alan Pavon. I live in Hillsborough, New Jersey, and I'm part owner of Parktown Center.
I apologize, could you spell your last name so Tanya
Sure.
can type it out
P
later?
as in Peter, A, V as in Victor, O, N as in nuts, which this property makes me sometimes. Anyway, Chris, really good job, very thorough, and you pointed out a number of issues, particularly at Parktown, which I'm trying to address and which will be addressed. A lot of it is aesthetic. One comment, though, regarding the garbage situation and the cans on the side. I'd love to have one big container, but you know, we pay a lot of taxes in town, and if I'm not mistaken, the town picks up the trash, and my tenants bring their units out to the street. So kind of that was an unfair comment. That's all I'd like to say.
Understood.
All right.
So to clarify, you're the owner of Parktown Center,
I am.
LLC?
Yes. Thank you very much.
Well, wait, sir, before you leave, let me ask you, do you have an objection to be included in designation if we were to make that designation tonight?
It's too early for me to say that, but I want the best for Highland Park. My family grew up in Highland Park. I love the town. I always have. My wife is from Highland Park, so I was bar mitzvahed in Highland Park. There's a lot about Highland Park that I like. Anything that we can do to make it a better place, a good place to live, which I think it already is fine with me.
Thank
Is
you
that
very
fair?
much. Oh, no, it's very much appreciated. Your feedback's important.
I also like to appreciate my thanks for he accompanied me on my inspection of the building, gave me access to all the spaces, including basements. Obviously, it's always awkward to say, that's wrong, that's wrong, that's wrong. It may not be a building violation per se, but it contributes to the report, and it was valuable to do that. It's also very awkward to explain the issues in front of you, so I appreciate your understanding of the process.
And with that, I'll be recording.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Are there any other members of the public wishing to be heard? Okay, seeing none, I'll close the public portion of the meeting, and I'll give the board one more opportunity for any comments in reaction. No? Okay. With that, I think we're ready, I feel, to make a decision on the presentation tonight on whether the properties identified can be accepted, should be designated as non-condemnation areas in need of redevelopment. So to that end,
I have
go
one
ahead,
question.
Jeff.
May I make this a little more complicated? May I make a motion, and it can be defeated, and then the other motion could be carried. But I'd like, if I may, make a motion to include all the properties, for a non-combination redevelopment, with the exception of Town Center and the Landmark Building. And, at least that would be on the record. At least I'm making that, I'd like to make, because you can make recommendations to Borough Council about which properties should they consider to be included and not included. So,
well, let me ask a technical question. Does he need my permission to make a motion?
No, he can make the motion.
That's what I thought. I think you can make your
Be
motion if you
specific
wish.
as to exactly what the motion is.
So the motion would be to exclude or those two properties, town site, town
I think if you look-
center, the town center property, I think that's lot 2, and the Landmark Building, lot 7, as part of a non-combination redevelopment. So it's recommending to Borough Council to not include those two properties as in need of redevelopment.
Right, the
The
second
other
property.
one, the other parts, the other ones, yes, be included in the redevelopment.
No, but the second,
Oh, second, oh.
We got a lot of hands. Hold on one second.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
The second property you identified, you said the town center property, what was the second
And the
property?
landmark, lot 7.
Lot 2 and Lot 7.
Lot 2 and Lot
So
7.
the motion, again, not to put words in your mouth, would be Lot 1, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8,
Yeah.
30, 37, 34, 36, and 35. Yes to being non-condemnation areas in need of redevelopment. No to Lot 2 and 7.
Yeah. Yes, thank you.
And that's your motion.
That is my motion. Thank
All
you.
right. You need a second. Anyone want a second
And I
motion?
think all motions, if there's multiple motions, should include the correction as Secretary Williams mentioned.
Do we need to include the correction on page
Yes.
21 in the motion?
Yes, the indication should be, whatever the motion is to approve or not approve would incorporate the annotation correction for the page identified, I think it was 46? Or
Was it 46?
Yeah,
Or
it's
40.
46.
On page 46.
on page 46 where the word north should be substituted for the word south should be substituted for the word north. That's correct, right?
Yes, and truthfully, I'll do a fine replace just in case, so it should be any other instances that may occur. So I'll do that check before I...
So the term, okay, just I'll read into the record. Page 46 under the subparagraph frontage conditions driveways. The first line in the second paragraph says the public sidewalk around North 4th Avenue, that will be changed to read South 4th Avenue. Okay, we don't see anything else here.
Not yet. But I'm just offering that if I do a fine replace all, there may be one or two others. Hopefully not.
All right, I
I'm
looked
hoping
briefly,
Alan-
but no, we would ask, certainly we would want you to be consistent.
Yes.
So, admittedly, if this was ever litigated, such an inconsistency at court would go crazy with it. I just, having had to defend these, I just want to mention that. So that's extremely important that be consistent.
Okay, so I think we had a second from Alvin, but before we proceed, Dan, your
I
comment.
I just had a clarifying question, so we're all on the same page with this motion. This is to move forward with the resolution designated area for looking at A, B, C, D, E, F. It's for A, C, E, and F, excluding B and D. I'm looking at the map on page 21.
That's correct. If the motion passes,
To authorize the preparation of the resolution.
if the motion passes, there could still be a separate motion to include B and D, or a motion to include all of them. So
Correct.
bear that in mind with how you choose to vote. This is a very specific package. In full disclosure, will likely bring a motion to include all the packages afterwards. I don't think that's surprising at this point. But that being said, let's take, are we doing a voice vote? Oh, no, it can't be a voice vote. We
Roll
have to do a
call.
roll call. Please, Tanya, let's take a roll call on Mr. Perlman's motion. Yes, Alan?
And which does not include 2 and 7.
This
that
is the
correct?
motion to recommend non-condemnation areas in need of redevelopment for the properties identified except for
2 and
Lot
7.
2, Park Down Center, and Lot 7, the landmark building, which is...
Madam Chair, before
Yes.
you have the vote, I just want to clarify or ask for clarification. If the vote passes with not including lots 7 and 2, I just want to clarify that if that's on the basis of the board does not believe it qualifies under the statutory requirements criteria of, I believe it's A or D. Does that
Or 3, or subpart 3.
or section 3. So I just want to be clear, if the board votes to not include lot 7, it's also taking the position that it doesn't qualify for section 3 as well.
Yeah.
Correct. Well, your findings did not find it, Lot 7, the landmark building, qualified for sub A or D or any other criteria, but it could qualify under sub 3.
Correct.
Okay.
So as board members consider voting on it, you can still use section 3 if you still don't, if you believe it doesn't hit the criteria A or D as laid out in the report.
Okay. Are we all on the same page on the motion that we're going to do?
I was not, I was saying that even section 3 doesn't meet section 3 either. That would be part of my resolution. But,
Okay.
okay, thank you.
Very good. All right, let's take a roll call
Thanks.
on the motion then.
Mr. Brusher?
No.
Mr. Chin?
No.
Ms. Hadhazi?
No.
Mr. Hale?
No.
Mr. Linares?
No.
Mr. Malay?
No.
Mr. Perlman?
Yes.
Mr. Stern Cardinal?
No.
Mr. Williams?
No.
Ms. Hand?
No for me. All right, well, the motion does not pass.
Motion is defeated.
So with that being said, are there any other motions to be made?
I'd like to make a motion to include the entire, and as presented, the entire proposal as presented by the planner.
I second.
Very good. So to clarify, that is including lots 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 30, 34, 35, 36, 37, which are all the parcels that were part of tonight's presentation as non-condemnation areas in need of redevelopment, with the amendments that we identified previously on page 46. All right, there, we have a motion, we have a second by Khalidra. Tanya, can we have a roll call, please?
Mr. Brusher?
Yes.
Mr. Chin?
Yes.
Ms. Hadhazi?
Yes.
Mr. Linares?
Yes.
Mr. Malay?
Yes.
Mr. Perlman?
No.
Mr. Stern Cardinal?
Yes.
Mr. Hale?
Yes.
Mr. Williams?
Yes.
Ms. Hand?
Yes. All right, with the majority, that motion passes, and that recommendation will go back to council, and they can proceed with the next steps in the process, and we'll see where it takes us from there. All right.
Madam Chair, in terms of
Yes.
procedure, I understand the governing body probably
Right.
hopes to vote on it on its 13th. I don't believe you had a resolution in front of you, so I assume the recommendations from the planning board to the governing body in between, because you won't have another meeting until January, will be in the form of perhaps a memo.
We have a messenger who can
Okay.
take some of the information back to council to us, but we can prepare formal memo if the board would like to receive one.
It's the intention of the governing body to take this up at the next redevelopment meeting, which is next Tuesday. So,
Okay.
So we would appreciate whatever formal notice we need, or I can take the message.
Do we need a formal notice to the town council of tonight's events, or can they wait until we sign a resolution?
Well, given the fact that you want to move quickly on it, it might be appropriate to let them, I prefer the idea of a formal resolution being provided to the governing body. But again, if time is of the essence, which it apparently is, and someone should confirm that for me.
It is.
It is?
Yeah, the council member Hale has indicated the governing body
All
wants
right,
to.
in that situation, what you would do is you would advise the council, and the resolution would have to follow. The resolution would follow ultimately because you want to ratify it.
Correct.
But the findings and conclusions can be imparted to the council, and it can be indicated that a resolution, again, I don't know what Mr. Thomas would do, but I know in my experience doing redevelopment, a resolution would be appropriate. But I realize, as I say, the speed with which this needs to be done, I believe it could be, the information could be shared with the council by the council representative.
Would it be safe to characterize the written resolution as the ministerial act, and therefore tonight's actions are in effect even if we do the formal resolution at the
Correct.
next meeting?
I think that's a fair statement.
Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. If you could take that back to council.
I will.
All right. That being said, we don't have any more formal items on the agenda, just to hear if we have any reports from Scott. Actually, Scott, I had a question for you. On the house over, and I do apologize, the double house with the Spanish style that's half dilapidated that we've been discussing for decades, what's going on with that?
That went back to the courts.
Oh, it did?
Yeah, that was supposed to be demoed already.
Right, but it was still there, so. Okay.
So I know the borough attorney sent information to the courts.
All right. I was curious about that because, as you said, I thought it was going to be demoed, and yet there it still stands open to the elements in all its glory. All right. Anybody have any questions for Scott about anything going on around town? Yes,
Question
Alan.
for Scott. The Wells Fargo, the lighting of the parking lot and the front of it is much more intense than it has been, say, 2 months ago. Did they make any, is there a permit for that or anything? Can they make it as bright as possible?
In front of Wells Fargo? No, I mean, I don't know of them doing any changes over there. But I mean, I can, go in and see what's going on.
If you go by at night, it's really obvious.
You mean the lights, the light?
Yeah, the lights in front and lights in the parking lot.
In the front of the property?
Yeah, in the front and the back.
Okay. I just, there may be some standards related to light spillage on a state roadway, since Riverton Avenue is a state roadway, and, I mean, if the illumination is too bright, that could be against some sort of state regulations. I'd have to look it up, I don't know offhand, but I would think there's a foot candle or some sort of luminescence limit spillage onto the state highway.
Interesting.
The DOT would probably have regulations about
Yeah.
as to that.
Oh, yeah,
I'm pretty certain.
yeah.
Anyone have questions about anything, any prior matters or any previous projects? Okay, with that, that brings us to the end of our agenda. I will hear a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn by Alan,
Second.
seconded by Matt.